If you asked me 2 years ago what I thought was going to happen in Wintermute episode 5, I would tell you I have no idea. This journey exploring the lore and story of the Long Dark has expanded my understanding and desire to know everything there is to know about the game. From stretching the possibilities of ambiguous notes buried out of sight to the storied experiences shared by the residents of Great Bear Island, this world and its story has grasped me in ways a lot of games and other media have failed to do. What comes with the light at the end of all things is still a mystery, but after going through this lore journey from the history of the Long Dark to Wintermute episode 4, I am ready to formulate my thoughts on the topic. What will happen in Wintermute episode 5? This is what I aim to do in this video, whether I'm right or wrong. Before I continue, please make sure to leave a like and a comment for the algorithm so I can continue making these videos. For this video, I will have 6 sections: the start of episode 5, the Quiet Apocalypse, Perseverance Mills, Will and Astrid, Mathis and the Prisoners, and the end of episode 5. For the major story threads, which are sections 2 through 5, I will present the bullet points that I used to summarize my thoughts for each of them. Let me start with how episode 5 might begin, which has a major problem. Taking a look at the end of episode 4, Mackenzie will have a companion in the form of Jace. This is a problem because there is no follower mechanic in the game, and I doubt Hinterland will spend the time making a follower mechanic for the final content update of the game. Basically, the intro to episode 5 will most likely be structured in a way to avoid having a follower companion. Either through a cutscene, time jump, or having Will carry Jace around, these are some of the ways to avoid having a follower companion if they desired it. Episode 5 might not even start from Will's perspective. It could start from Astrid's perspective, but she would be recovering from hypothermia and dehydration. There is a period where Will and Jace are on their way to Suzuki and Astrid is still recovering, so the likely start would be from Will's perspective. Because of this, I believe that episode 5 will start with Suzuki as the main focus. Next, let me start by bullet pointing and summarizing each of the major topics. Starting with the Quiet Apocalypse, this is what I'm predicting to be revealed. Atwood will indeed know what Wintermute is, and she will reveal how she knows about it and how she knows Jeremiah. It's pretty obvious that Jeremiah has a military background, making it easy for them to cross paths. Atwood likely worked for the government or military as a researcher. Considering her background in astrophysics, she likely worked on research specifically in this field. This takes me to what Wintermute is, which is likely a military or government call sign triggered by a specific scenario. The scenario was the first flare, and Wintermute is the response. If Wintermute was a simulated scenario as a part of a research project, there would be some kind of response to it that would be triggered by the government or military. Seeing as the effects of the first flare are global, I don't know how that would work. Suzuki will probably be shielded from the electromagnetic disturbance like Jay suggested, considering it was a former government facility. As for the first flare, we already know it would be categorized as a coronal mass ejection, or CME. With the effects it had on the planet, we can conclude that the entire globe was affected in the same way, meaning destroyed electronics, lack of electricity, strange animal behaviors, shifting climate, and aurora events. I'm predicting that Atwood will make a startling revelation of some kind. It is most likely that the first flare was an extinction level event, and the Quiet Apocalypse is here to stay. Considering that things are only getting worse 1 year after the first flare in Black Frost, I don't believe there is a way to go back. The first flare has rewritten the rules of survival, and evolution must oblige. In the end, Jace will most likely stay behind in order to help Atwood and the researchers at Suzuki study the electromagnetic disturbance that is still lingering. From here, Mackenzie would be free to head to Perseverance Mills. Perseverance Mills reached a critical point even before the final cutscene in episode 4, and the cure could not come any sooner. Mackenzie will most likely arrive at a point where most of the town is reaching the point of no return, which is death. The outbreak plaguing Perseverance Mills most certainly revolves around the mind and the issues with sleeping. It makes sense when I say that half of the town may resemble mindless zombies that can't sleep. With drowned quarantine breakers washing ashore and these sleepless eyes on these two strangers, Perseverance Mills is dealing with something quite familiar to us owners of the Tales from the Far Territory expansion. People will likely be dying as Will arrives, but hopefully his arrival with the intact cure makes a difference between salvation or a watery grave for Perseverance Mills. There is always the case that with everything the hard case went through, it's possible that the cure got destroyed. that would certainly mean the end of Perseverance Mills. This is where I want to clarify something important. While the Perseverance Mills outbreak likely shares a history with the Langston Mine outbreak, that doesn't mean Will, Astrid, and the rest of Perseverance Mills will know or learn about the Langston Mine outbreak. The Tales trilogy is and always was meant for our eyes and ears only. The events of Rudiger's project and the details surrounding it will not have an impact on episode 5. There may be some hints about it, but the tales were never meant to be a part of Wintermute. Their purpose was to add context that only we, the player, would have. I believe we may get mention of John Industries or whatever group or entity built a duplicate machine, but I think the duplicate machine and its resulting illness will be the only major part of the Tales trilogy that will make it into Wintermute. As for why this duplicate machine was built, we might be staring down the barrel of an Umbrella-like scheme from Resident Evil, complete with sleepwalking zombies. Not literal zombies, by the way. Finally, I'm willing to bet that due to the first flare, this duplicate machine was destroyed and that Glimmerfog may be present in the surrounding area around it. This is where I think the story in episode 5 will get more emotional. Will and Astrid's relationship is one of the core drivers for their protagonists to reunite. Well, the hard case also did some of the work. I believe that after all they have been through, they will have learned the importance of reconciliation. To start, they need to both acknowledge that they haven't healed from their past trauma. Not only is the hard case vital for saving Perseverance Mills, but I believe that it could also be an opportunity to help initiate the therapy session they both need. The code to the hard case could potentially be a date that is familiar to both of them. Maybe it is the date they got married, maybe it is the date they lost their son. It is no secret considering the subtle hints in the episode's starting credits, the opening cutscene, and some particular lines from episode 1 and 3, but Will and Astrid had a child together.
I think about him all the time, you know.
I know you do.
What I did. The choice I made. I did it for us. Losing a child is...
It's like losing your own life. You have a kind heart, Mackenzie. But it's a heavy one.
You said you had something that could help her.
I can't just... Look, it is in a secure area of the lab. I can't just walk out with it. There are security protocols and...
Astrid, it's getting worse. You have to do something. You understand that better than anyone.
Yes, I do.
I'm afraid it's happening again, Astrid. I'm afraid we'll lose her this time.
That's not gonna happen.
Unfortunately, it seemed that their child died from an accident that they were involved in. Considering how Will took offense to Astrid's comment about daytime drinking, alcohol was likely involved. It would not surprise me if the accident involved drunk driving, a fight, and an unfortunate accident. I can't shake this feeling that Will is responsible for the loss of their child. It would explain this sudden confession at the end of the plane ride, which provides some subtle hints of his guilt for what happened. It seemed he made a choice that was meant to be good for them, but it resulted in the loss of their son. I'm not entirely sure how that played out, but we don't have any context for what happened. Due to the guilt, I can see Will succumbing to the bottle. From this, it is likely that Astrid is the one that initiated their divorce. Through their shared trauma, the experiences they've had on Great Bear Island, the people they've connected with, and the lessons they have learned along the way, I believe they are more than ready to start the healing process at Perseverance Mills. I think there are two things they need to do together. One, they need to acknowledge that they are still hurting over the past. And two, which is the most important thing that I believe needs to happen, they must remove their wedding rings. Astrid claimed that she wore it for the memories, but in reality, the rings symbolize they are both clinging to the past. Removing their wedding rings together would show they are both willing to let go of the past, even the good memories, in order to heal from the bad ones. In order for them to start over, this is what I believe is the most important thing they need to do. Whether or not they decide to become a couple again isn't important. What is important is that they let go of the past and find a path forward. How can an apocalypse with stakes, tragedy, and emotion not also include a little conflict? Following the events at Blackrock, it was obvious that Mathis and crew would be out for revenge against Will and Jace. More importantly, I believe the death of Donner will be the main driver for Mathis to sweep through the island to look for them. Donner dying would be the fuel he would need to go full crazy. Mathis at full crazy would effectively put every single innocent person on Great Bear Island in danger if they got in his way. In one scenario, Mathis finds Suzuki, takes the place hostage, and forces them to call for Will during an aurora. In the other, he finds Perseverance Mills and forces the town to give him Will. Either way, there will likely be innocent lives lost. The prisoners have rifles and revolvers at their disposal, so the ensuing battle will be deadly. If any major character dies, I think it will be the characters that could return. While he said he was going to recover and then take care of a personal matter, I believe it is likely that Jeremiah could return. Considering she was hunting them down all the way to Blackrock, I believe it is also likely that Molly could return as well. Whether or not they or another random side character dies in the battle against Mathis, Mathis's violent nature will likely lead to deaths. I believe a betrayal may even occur within the group of prisoners. Mathis's associates, Heller and Vakon, have both noted how crazy he really can get and how he had been changing since they left Milton. They also both fear the moment that he would snap. If a betrayal against Mathis occurs, it will likely be one of these two. Vakon seemed to show just a little bit less loyalty to Mathis's cause. So how will Wintermute end? Looking at the title of episode 5, which is the light at the end of all things, something good must happen at the end, right? The title of the episode even inspired a quote I wrote to feature at the end of all future lore videos, which touches on what I see as the most valuable aspect of the idea of an apocalypse. In the end, something good must come of the story. Otherwise, what was the point of watching a bunch of people struggling to survive, only to have a bad ending? Mathis is going to have a bad ending. I think that's pretty obvious. His desires will likely crumble and he will either die by the protagonists or their allies, be abandoned by the other convicts, or be killed in a betrayal. Once the dust settles, each respective group will likely make the decisions that are best for themselves. Then there is the ship. This ship on the episode 5 teaser poster is coming to Great Bear Island to rescue survivors. I firmly believe that the captain of the ship was the mystery receiver of this distress call from Perseverance Mills. Both Will and Astrid heard the same distress call, but neither of them were the intended receiver of the call. The actual receiver could only be heard by the radio caller from Perseverance Mills, who was asking for help. This ship is likely the response to this distress call. There are two scenarios that I can think of that will happen at the very end of Wintermute. In one, only Will and Astrid will board the ship apart from some other background characters. In the other, everyone from Perseverance Mills, including Will and Astrid, will board the ship and leave for the mainland. The first scenario, which was the primary scenario I believed in the most up until early December 2024, would serve as the perfect ending for Will and Astrid to start their new life together. In the case they do resolve their issues and decide to start over again, going to the mainland would be their perfect ending. As for the rest, it is likely that the Suzuki and Perseverance Mills survivors will remain to protect and assist anyone that needs help. This would include Jace, Atwood, Jane, and Jeremiah and Molly if they did in fact return. For the most part, these are islanders that survived through the darkest era of Great Bear Island's history, and that was before the Quiet Apocalypse. Their struggles would not be much different with the exception of more dangerous and unpredictable wildlife. It was in their nature to stay on Great Bear Island after the collapse, and it will likely be in their nature to remain on Great Bear Island. The second scenario, which I conceived in December 2024, would explain an important question that has come up a lot recently. What happened to everyone? This is a question that came up a lot because of the traitor, Sutherland the misanthrope. Throughout the various conversations across his tale, he kept insisting that he had a theory for where everyone went, but he never shared it. I know that Wintermute and Survival Mode exist within their own canon, but that doesn't mean we can't draw from either of them to talk about the other. They both have notes that explain things that have happened in the other canon. The Tales trilogy in Survival Mode exists to add more context for one aspect of what is happening in Perseverance Mills and Wintermute. What I'm trying to say is that Sutherland's theory is still valid in the context of the events of Wintermute. While he is clearly missing a few vital neurons firing in his head, I would believe his theory if I knew what it was. But what was his theory? When it comes to Sutherland and his backstory, there is something important to remember. He has been sailing around the island coastline since the first flare. His theory for what happened to everyone is likely that they left on a ship that he may or may not have seen approaching or leaving the island. He even mentioned hearing people yelling loudly from the coast while on his boat, which may or may not be the survivors at Perseverance Mills. Yelling loud enough for him to hear while at sea had to be really loud, or maybe even violent. This yelling could have been the moment the protagonists and survivors were fighting their battle against Mathis. There are a lot of possibilities here, but this ship that appears to be going to Great Bear Island may be the answer to the question, where did everyone go? This doesn't answer the question for all the survivors across Wintermute and survival mode, but there is the old answer to the question that we all believed for a long time. They died. We can see the corpses for some survivors, but not the named characters from Wintermute. This could be a because game thing, or it could be because they escaped, left, and died elsewhere, or maybe they are lurking around the island to this day. Regardless of where anyone went in the context of Wintermute, we know that some people are boarding the ship. As for what this means for anyone that boards the ship, it will mean they must accept the hard fact that no matter where they go, life will never be the same. The reality is that the world has changed forever. The first flare has rewritten the rules of survival, and evolution must oblige. The quiet apocalypse will dictate that what was will likely never be again. Now I believe I understand what Methuselah meant when he said,
"Aren't we here to witness an apocalypse of an apocalypse, you and I?"
The quiet apocalypse was the first apocalypse, one that initiated the destruction of modern technology, altered the patterns of nature, and started a rapid shift in climate. The second apocalypse has been here the whole time, and it is ongoing. The devolution of society, the loss of rule of law, and the shift in human nature is the second apocalypse. The line between good and evil has been blurred. Murder to one person is survival to another. Wintermute, survival mode, Black Frost, and the future of the Long Dark as a franchise is the apocalypse of an apocalypse. Even if this apocalypse is here to stay, every long dark tunnel has light at the other end. All one can hope is to live long enough to see the beauty in between the darkness and the light.